Could mention that we've got another
Wow.
book. I'll take a picture. More information.
Well, I would think so, yeah. Until they start shooting at each other. No, but I did.
Because we're gonna be sitting here, so I think that's
They tried life-saving measures.
They do. And then this is just gonna be red, so. And then this is going to be closely marked by Joyce. So he's just gonna add it. And have the little. Oh, there is an extra copy of the.
I thought, my cousin.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. Maybe you want to go back.
I had it. What the Delta data coming from.
This is great. That's it. Yeah, I think he was in the museum once.
Yes, and I'm trying to, he's gonna be here next week, and I'm trying to
Sure.
really go through things.
Yeah.
You done?
Good morning, and thank you for being here. We are going to be doing this without a sound system today, so we are going to talk as loud as we can. But for those of you, oh, they've got one. I'm going to be talking without a sound system today. So for those of you in the back, it's very helpful if you go like this, and then I'll just shout louder at y'all, okay?
I'm doing it.
Welcome. First, I want to say, show of hands, how many people in the crowd today are veterans? Thank you. And for all of the rest of you, I imagine that your lives have also been touched by veterans, whether they were your spouse, your child, your parent, etc. So we all know how important veterans have been to our country, to us. So thank you, veterans, and thank you to the Oregon Area Historical Society, who has worked hard to put together a program for us today that's going to focus on local involvement in World War II. And they have spent a lot of time on this, and they have done a lot of shrinking down to try and fit our kind of narrow time frames. So they probably will feel like they're galloping through things, but we'll try and keep up as they gallop along. I just also want to thank the kitchen staff and the volunteers. We have several volunteers in the back along with our kitchen gal, and without them it would be a lot harder to get lunch to you. Lunch today, if you're a veteran, lunch today is free. If you are not a veteran and you would like to make a donation, there are 2 wooden boxes behind you that are marked for lunch donations. When you get into the dining room for lunch, you will find that there are some placemats and thank you cards and letters, just a variety of things that were created by the 3rd graders at Brooklyn Elementary School who wanted to thank the veterans for their service to the country. When you do go in, try and go as far back as you can. It's easier for the crowd behind you if the first people in go towards the back of the dining room. Latecomers don't have to walk around. And finally, for those of you especially who served Uncle Sam once upon a time, we have forms that we have to fill out once a year for Uncle Sam. They're actually called Sam's forms. That's why I make this bad joke. But I'm sure if you were in the military, you used to do a lot of paperwork, and so we just have to get that paperwork done. Anne's been around and had some of you do it. For those of you who didn't get that paperwork done yet, she'll track you down at some point before you leave for the day. So we're going to start with some music from our bugler, I believe. If the bugle's warm enough, otherwise we can conclude with some music from our bugler.
It warmed up fine.
Okay,
Where would you like me?
why don't you just come right up here,
Okay.
where everybody can enjoy. Excuse me.
My name's Gene Vandenbosch, and I help out with the Oregon Brooklyn Honor Guard, playing things for funerals and Veterans Day, Memorial Day. I'm a retired high school band director, moved here about 3 years ago from Illinois. Sorry about that.
Just so you got a beer for you.
All right, so, God bless America.
I'll stand close to the microphone in case some of you back there are doing this. But my name is Joanne Swenson. I am with the Oregon Area Historic. Oh gosh, they're holding their ears already. Now I have to figure out how to use this. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's better? All right, great. So, good morning to everyone, and thanks for being here. And I want to echo up here. I think I have to have it in my mouth. I also express, on behalf of the Oregon Area Historical Society, our thanks to our veterans that are here today. Thank you just doesn't seem like enough, but it's meant from the heart. So today we have a program that's going to focus on World War II. We have letters to read and some articles that were found in the archives of the Historical Society. We're only going to get through maybe 7 letters. There are numerous letters, and I just want you to know that on the table over here, you're welcome to look through the rest of them, browse through them, read them if you'd like, and also look at some of the other stuff that's there. So we're going to start off with reading some of those letters, but I'd like to introduce the team that put this together. Joel Olson, Heather Young, Dixie, I always want to say Smith, but it's Brown, and Mary Norway. Oh gosh. So I'm going to turn this over to somebody who can really speak. Okay. So it's you, Mary.
Oh, I didn't know you were first up.
Hello?
So I'm here today to talk about my dad and my uncle, and I have my 3 cousins here that are. I don't do Hendrickson.
You do the Hendrickson.
Well, give me Hendrickson and I'll read him. Okay, I'm mistaken. I'm here today to talk about Alvin Hendrickson, who's writing from New Guinea on Sunday, January 10th, 1943. I can tell you, I have seen combat and some other things not even nice to think about. This is a nasty business, this war, but I guess that can't be helped. I guess by now the enemy knows we mean business and we are not to be fooled with. I suppose you had a very nice Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday. Here it is very different. Thanksgiving Day I had a can of corned beef for dinner and ate it while keeping very low down in the trench. I didn't put my head out very much. I can also tell you it wasn't hail that was flying around. Christmas Day was better. That morning someone threw a grenade in the water and killed a large number of fish, which we cleaned and fried for dinner. We also got a small Christmas box from the Red Cross with candy, raisins, etc. in it. Very different from what we have at home. How's the UW, Cletus? For gosh sakes, don't ever get in the infantry. You'd be better in the Air Corps if you do come to this show.
These are the words of Erwin Olson himself. I will try to tell you a little bit about my combat experience in New Guinea without incurring the wrath of the censor. We were loaded on ships and sailed in one of the largest convoys ever assembled. There were boats as far as the eye could see and in all directions, and we knew that there were many more on the horizon. It's hard to believe, but the men all acted like they were going on a furlough in Frisco. They laughed, they sang, they played cards, always ending up with the discussion of the girl back home. Lieutenant Colonel LaFollette was aboard the same ship as I, so I stopped by his cabin the first day and introduced myself as another Wisconsinite. The Navy fed us wonderful food, sort of like fattening the Thanksgiving turkey, I guess. Every night we had a movie, except the night before the landing. It was terribly hot that last night, so most of us slept on deck, or rather tried to sleep. Sometime during the night we were anchored within sight of the beach we were to take in the morning. We couldn't make out much, just the dim outline of mountains. Then came the dawn and the Navy gave the breach a terrific shelling. It looked almost like a movie scene. Then it was time for us to do our stuff. Although I was on the staff, I accompanied the assault troops. We climbed over the side of the ship and into the landing barges. We were off. We stayed low in the boats so as not to get shot, but occasionally we couldn't risk taking a peek to see what was going on, and plenty was. The sea was quite rough, and I got seasick. In fact, I didn't care whether I got shot or not. I just draped myself over the rail. In a minute or so, I felt much better. I looked around rather sheepishly, but no one else had noticed my weakness because half of them were doing the same thing. I guess I thought my whole life history on that trip on the beach. We expected to be riddled by machine gun fire as we ran off the boat. So many things raced through my mind. We weren't scared though, rather eager, I would say. The officers got up in the bow of the boat so they could lead the men off. The boat scraped the beach. This was it. The ramp went down and we scrambled out and ran for cover. To our surprise, resistance was extremely light. We'd caught them unawares. Then our advances started. We were ever alert for snipers, and it paid dividends. I'll never forget the first night we spent in the jungle. We knew the enemy could be sneaking in at night, so we teamed up in pairs and dug deep foxholes. One man would stay awake while the other slept or tried to. I kept the knife handy all night long. I think I aged 2 full years that one night. Erwin Olson.
Okay, now it's the knees.
Okay, so I'm here to talk about my dad, Russ Neath, and my uncle, Earl Sonny Neath, and 3 of my cousins are in the audience, so I'd like them to come up and stand behind me. They're too shy to talk, but they can stand. Yeah. Okay, we'll start with Russ. Russell Neath. Well, let me preface this by saying apparently the Neath boys didn't like to write letters, so we had to do this with spotlights instead of letters. Russell Neath, son of Mr. and Mrs. Vaughn Neath, left on May 19, 1942 for Camp Wallace, Texas for his basic training. He was then transferred to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and later to Fort Dix. He left for overseas in November 1942, landing in Casablanca. From a post at Algiers, where he was stationed for some time, he was sent to Matour, near Brizet, and while he was there, he was able to visit Tunis and the ancient Roman city of Carthage. He fought on the Anzio beachhead in Italy. While in Anzio, he and a buddy built an underground home, 8 feet high, 7 feet wide, and 6 feet long. It had compartments for his clothes and was equipped with electric lights. They took springs from the beds of bombed Italian homes to make their beds. This tells you a lot about how my dad was his whole life. Sergeant Neath took part in the Sicilian, Naples, Foggia, southern France, Rhineland, Central Europe, and the Roman Arno campaigns. He has the European, African, Middle Eastern Theater Ribbon, a Bronze Service Arrowhead, 5 Overseas Service Bars, and 1 Service Stripe. He received his discharge on October 2nd, 1945. He returned to Oregon where he raised his family and spent most of his career working at the Oregon School for Girls. He lived in Florida for several years and returned to Oregon when he was very aged to be closer to his daughter and family. He said one of the highlights of his later years was the honor flight, his trip to Washington, D.C. in 2010. Russ's daughter, Mary Neath Norwell, donated her father's memorial flag to the Oregon Area Historical Society. Earl Sonny Neath, Seaman First Class Sonny Neath, entered the Navy in February 1943 and took his boot training at the Great Lakes Naval Station. Later, he was sent to Norfolk, Virginia, and was assigned to the USS Cincinnati. The next time he was heard from, he was somewhere in the West Indies, Trinidad, and then on to Brazil. He writes of the abundant rain and told of fishing right from the barracks door, with bullheads as their catch. While in the West Indies, Sonny writes that they had been eating bananas and coconuts, and there was plenty of entertainment. He and Robert Mortensen, Seaman Second Class, also of Stoughton, have been together ever since they left the latter part of February. He did get a furlough, and a family gathering was held in his honor at the home of his parents while he was home on his 30-day furlough. A picnic dinner was held at noon. Sonny was discharged in 1946 and married shortly thereafter. He returned to Wisconsin, settled in Belleville, worked in Oregon for the Oregon Farm Center for most of 36 years, and raised 6 children. I've got 3 of them. 2 of his sons, Roger and Tommy, followed his footsteps into the military. Roger in the Army, serving in Korea, and Tommy followed his dad into the Navy.
Robert Bob Cusick. These are some excerpts from various letters sent by Bob. Yesterday, on my day off, 13 of us took a boat trip to one of the islands. We ran the boat up to the shore. When we returned, the darn tide had run out and the boat was far too heavy to move with manpower. We were supposed to be back at 4:30, but we didn't even get off the boat until 7 when the tide came back in. Of course, it was pitch dark by then and no moonlight at all, but the skipper brought us in great shape. Really had a good time, though the island was beautiful. Lots of coral beds with all their color. Also, plenty of little fish, which are just so colorful. April 23rd, 1942. On an island somewhere in the South Seas, I have moved from Australia and I'm on an island in the South Seas. It is plenty hot with mosquitoes as big as jacksnipe, a small bird. But we have netting, which helps a lot. I guess we'll save some money now, as they tell us we only get 1/3 of our wages, and the rest will be put into the bank for us. We have no place to spend it anyway. We can't go to taverns, there are no restaurants, the movies use all the wrong languages, and our cigarettes are furnished. I sure have seen lots of things since I left the States, but some of them are hard to write about. This island is really pretty, and you should see the natives here. When a man is looking for a bride, he dyes his hair red. I'm going down to the stream this afternoon to wash my clothes and take a bath. It sure will feel good to get cleaned up again. June 23rd, 1942. New Caledonia, in the southwest Pacific Ocean, south of Vanuatu. Gosh, we had sweet corn today, the first time we had butter in 2 months. It really was a treat. I think our food is picking up now. I sure hope so, as I'm tired of cornbread and hash. June 7th, 1942. July 7th, 1942. I spent a very quiet 4th. We played softball and had a band concert, so it was quite different than usual. One of the fellows caught a fish the other day, weighed about 20 pounds. There are some bats around here as big as crows. They sure are goofy looking. Heard the news last night over the company radio and it sounded good. The radio is sure swell to have. Can keep up on things better and do enjoy their music. December 17th, 1942, somewhere in the South Pacific. I really can't say much, although I have had some experiences in the past few months that I'll never forget. We received the names and addresses of all the boys in service from the honor roll committee. We sure have a lot of them in the service, and they're spread all over the world.
December 30th, 1944, U.S. 3rd Army, France. Took quite a trip today. Went up to Metz and then on to Thionville. Spent a little time and looked over the ruins of Metz and the Fort Joan d'Arc. One can well understand why it took us so long to take Metz. There is a ring of approximately 40 forts around the city. Well, the year of 1944 has just about come to an end, and it really has been a hectic one. Guess I'll spend New Year's Eve down at the little cafe where I spent Christmas Eve. People there were really swell to us at Christmas. They had 7 of us stay for a waffle dinner after they closed the cafe. We sure enjoyed it plenty. January 2nd, 1945. Here it is, the start of another year, and I guess things sure don't seem to look any brighter. About the only thing a fellow has to look forward to the next day is the next day and hope the situation improves. I suppose New Year's Eve was brought in back home with great hilarity. Things were pretty quiet over here, not much chance for a call for hilarity, and there is nothing to be happy about except for the fact that you're still on the top. We went down to the little cafe and had the best time a person could have under the circumstances. Things are more on the grim side at present. I was in the city of Luxembourg for a while yesterday. It's a very nice city, really modern. The people there speak French, English, and German, and some of them mix the languages together. Everything is in comparatively good shape. People are dressed well, so I guess things haven't been too bad. Leaving the city and all the rest of the way back, I had to drive blackout. Believe me, it was no fun. The roads were pretty slippery and full of curves, and you run into stretches that have been pretty badly beat up. The sky was full of artillery flashes. It makes a fellow know there's a war on. Don't know if you'll notice, but after 23 months in the Army, I made it to PFC. Isn't that wonderful? I'll get $4 more a month. Then in a later letter, March 28th, 1945, he's writing to George Litch's parents. I was very sorry to hear of George's untimely death, and you have my deepest sympathy. I was in the city of Luxembourg today and took the opportunity to visit George's grave. He is buried in a very beautiful little cemetery just outside the city of Luxembourg. The cemetery is located in a little valley surrounded by a small woods and of pine trees. There's a large cross in the center of the cemetery, and the graves at present have small white crosses with identification tags on them. His grave is approximately at the center of the cemetery. My only regret is I didn't have a camera, so I could not send you a picture. I hope to get another trip to that district, and if at all possible, I will send a picture to you. They know I'm not afraid to talk. Warren Anthony is writing to Junior and Buddy. Dear Junior and Buddy, I'll tell you what it's like at sea. To start out with, it's usually a rough day and it's your first time out, so you get the idea. It's a hell of a spot to be in. First you're afraid of dying, and then after a while, you're afraid you're not going to. You get used to it though, and can walk the decks when they're laying at over 45 degrees. It's nice in these waters in the afternoon. You see a lot of sea life then. Flying fish, you should see them sail. Porpoises, which look like sharks but are harmless, jump around the ship. They eat sharks when they can catch them, but won't touch a man in the water. I've seen sea turtles that are 5 feet across. They look so darn funny getting tossed around on the high waves. Yesterday, a couple of the boys caught some barracuda. They're man-eating fish with pretty wicked teeth, but slim like a trout. If you ever want a smooth ride, try a submarine, below the surface, not above. It's okay, but I'll stick to the destroyer. I like the fresh air and sunshine. Right now I'm in school learning radio and repairing submarine detection gear. It's interesting work, but it's a stiff course. This is followed by a news clipping. Warren Anthony, soundman 2nd class, son of Mr. and Mrs. E.W. Anthony, route to Oregon, Wisconsin, survived the explosion of the destroyer, the USS Turner, off Sandy Hook, New Jersey, Monday, without a scratch. Although Anthony was uninjured in the explosion which sank the destroyer, 2 of his buddies were killed. Anthony, however, had been previously wounded in the first invasion of Sicily. Anthony has been aboard the Turner on a trip to Iceland and on 3 crossings of the Atlanta to Casablanca. He entered the Navy on November 4, 1942 and was trained at Great Lakes, Illinois and Key West, Florida. According to information received by the parents, Anthony was the only Wisconsin man on the Turner. He has sent parents pictures of the ship. Anthony's father was a petty officer in the Navy during World War I, stationed from 1917 to 1918 in Southampton, England. Did we get a break now?
War Department officials and newspapers often stressed that mail from home was one of the most important morale builders to men in the service. And David Schuster wrote, "I'm always anxious to get those letters from home and always try to get at least 1 letter a week off to everyone." Private First Class Schuster enlisted in the Marines in 1943 at the age of 22. He saw action in the South Pacific, including the Battle of Midway, the Solomons, Santa Cruz, and the landing at Guadalcanal. And he writes this: My first year in the Marines is almost finished. I'll never regret my enlistment in the Marine Corps. It is still the fightingest bunch of men on earth, with the reputation that no one can touch. I've been on sea duty for the past 7 months now. Although we have our battles and hardships, life at sea is an experience that will not easily be forgotten. I'm not permitted to mention where I've been, however. There's always something new to look forward to, and we can expect almost anything to happen at any time. As you probably know, the Enterprise is an aircraft carrier, one of the largest ships in the fleet. It is a veritable city. Aboard, we have our own soda fountains, store, cobble shop, barber shop, almost everything to make it a complete city. We also have a small but well-equipped library and recreation room, while the flight deck affords room for ball games, etc. At sea, we are always on alert. We are fighting a very clever enemy, but we're ready to meet him at any time and at any place. I only hope that within another year, the Enterprise will be operating out of Tokyo itself. And Schuster praised the ship. She was sure a good ship to be on, and I'd give a lot to have duty aboard her again. I was darn proud to be a member of her crew, and darn lucky to come through as I did. David Schuster.
This is actually my favorite part. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the women of World War II. I'm going to talk about Peg Kellogg and Eunice Andrew, but I want to mention the other women from Oregon that we know that served in World War II. Rita Plummer, Joy Hulbert, Lucy Wallace, Mary Jean Pease, Camilla Schlomer, and Fern Klug all went and served our country. But right now I'd like to talk a minute about Peg Kellogg. Peg Kellogg had just finished nursing school in Chicago and enlisted in the Army Nursing Corps. She was sent to Europe and moved 14 times between August 11 and September 9. Quote, we followed wherever the branch of Patton's army needed our service. Landmines were rampant and not visible. One of our doctors was asked to aid a young GI who lost a leg stepping on the mine. The doctor and another young GI went to help. That young soldier stepped on a landmine and was killed. The doctor had shrapnel in his leg. That doctor was from Wisconsin. Eventually, the war ended. 2 doctors borrowed a Jeep to drive into Munich. What a disaster. We happened on a fenced area that had been labeled Arbet. It means work. We drove in to find the concentration camp Ebensee. When we were found wandering through a building with a dirt floor, we were told to leave now. There was piled 3 deep pallets of straw with human skeletal bodies on them. This was 10 days after the end of the war, but this particular camp had not been liberated yet. Peg was discharged, came home, married Dr. Lloyd Kellogg, and settled in Oregon. Eunice Andrud grew up on a farm 3 miles south of Oregon on Highway 14. She was the oldest of 8 children. In 1995, she gave a presentation to the Women's Club of Towson, Maryland, and the following is an excerpt of that. The Women's Army Auxiliary Corps was created to relieve the men from non-combative jobs. The bill was finally signed by President Roosevelt on May 14, 1942. I reported for training at Fort Des Moines, Iowa in January of 1943. After training at different bases, she was sent overseas. Eunice was assigned to the 5th Army as a clerk stenographer. In her words, we spent some time living in Mostagen, Algeria. While stationed there, the Women's Auxiliary Corps became the Women's Army Corps, and we were now soldiers in the Army with the same pay and benefits as other non-combat soldiers. Of all the field armies, the 5th Army spent the longest continuous period of action against the enemy. For 20 months it fought in Italy against a wily enemy, against rocky mountainous terrain, and against the miseries of snow and cold in its winter offensive. The tents were 5 girls to a tent, a small stove in the middle, plus all our gear. Dirt floor, sometimes gravel, sometimes boards. The offices were also in tents. For the most part, we all enjoyed the outdoor life. Oh, there were drawbacks: mosquitoes, bugs, spiders, mice, and snakes. One morning when I put my shoe on, I discovered a green snake in one of them. I shook it out and kept going. Several of us went to a military burial service for one of the servicemen at the Anzio Natuno Cemetery. That cemetery was a field of white crosses as far as one could see. A total of 83 women served with the 666 9th WAC Headquarters Platoon, 59 original members and 24 replacements. I was with the WAC organization with the 5th Army, where our services were very much needed and appreciated. It was the experience of a lifetime. Eunice came back to Wisconsin, but she did not stay. She moved to Washington, where she lived most of her life, working at the Pentagon. She married, had no children, and lived in Towson, Maryland until 1999. Her husband died in 1999, and she moved to Wisconsin to be closer to family. Eunice died in 2005.
So our slides aren't right, but we'll get to that one. We briefly talked about some of our veterans from World War II, but I wanted to list the names of the other veterans who also served during World War II that were from Oregon. Melvin and Colin Ace, Harold and Curtis Rasmussen, Roy and Samuel McMicken, and William Rowlands, Maurice Johnny Owen and Thomas Owen, Gunder, Theodore and Charles Lundley, Robert White and Raymond White, Robert Olson and Erwin Olson and Raymond Olson, John and Robert Killerlane, Lee and Harold Dunn, Robert and Bruce Lithjohan, Ralph Conklin and Ray Conklin, Paul and John Mannion, Gerald Booth and Philip Booth and Billy Booth, Richard Albers and Norman Harris, Harold Mant and Lawrence Mant, Melvin, Ivan, and Orrin Grinnell, Russell Neath and Earl Neath. All the siblings that served. Siblings or cousins or brothers-in-laws. And now to honor those who died in World War II. Leonard Sathler, George Litch,
Oh, there we go.
Donald Noyce, Walter, I'm gonna slaughter, Walter Schmidley, and Robert Sweeney.
Are we gonna do Cletus?
Yeah. And you might just mention, all of those people that you just read the names of, they were all multiple sons and daughters. Are you doing the full close? How close are we to done? Just your letter? Yeah.
The Cletus Hendrickson story covers 5 days. So the aromas from the kitchen are tempting us, and if you will just sit back and relax a little bit, this is a longer reading of all that we've had today. At age 19, Cletus Hendrickson left home here in Oregon and entered the Army for World War II. After training stateside and in England, he stepped onto European soil 78 years ago on November 23rd, 1944. And before long, he was at the front near Rottingen, Germany. He tells about 5 days that were life-changing for him. In his own words then, it was December 13th, 1944. There I was, out on the road in a staging area, a gunner, corporal, second in command of an 81 millimeter mortar squad of the 3rd Platoon. We were told that today would be the day we would move on up. Perhaps this was now our moment of truth. We were going to meet the enemy, to put to use all that we had learned about killing others and protecting ourselves from those that would rather kill us. Squad leader Casper checked out every member of our mortar squad to make sure we were all properly equipped and prepared. We formed 2 single lines, one on each side of the road, so that vehicles could pass between us in the middle. After a long time of waiting, we were finally given the order to move out. As we continued our march, I began to get the feeling we were approaching the front line. I could see some smoke in the distance. Also, I heard muffled sounds that must have come from the artillery. By mid-afternoon, it became evident that there had been some kind of violent activity happening recently. Snow in the ditches had been disturbed, and I began seeing pieces of equipment in the ditches. I identified one of those pieces as the steel helmet of an American soldier. This brought the seriousness of the situation into focus for me. And oh my gosh, there was a Jeep in the ditch, tilted heavily to the right, almost tipped over. It had a flat tire and looked like it had sustained damage on the left side. Thank God there was no one in it as we marched past. As the smoke on the horizon grew darker, the sound of gunfire grew louder, and the debris around us became more obvious. After a long walk up a slight incline, we reached the crown of a hill. I could see for a great distance, and there was ahead of us an almost unbelievable sight. It was a barricade of thousands of concrete blocks sticking up out of the ground and looking like teeth. This barricade extended both to the left and right as far as the eye could see, running through the valley and up over the hills. We soon realized this was part of the fabled German Siegfried Line, the so-called impregnable defense intended to keep out would-be invaders of the fatherland. The concrete blocks that we beheld in awe were spaced so as to trap or stop enemy vehicles, especially tanks. This allowed German defenders in nearby concrete bunkers in the pillboxes to disable or destroy the invaders. We later called those concrete barriers the dragon teeth, for obvious reasons. As we descended into the valley, the reality of war suddenly came into focus for me when a medical ambulance with the familiar Red Cross painted on its side made its way in the opposite direction. As the vehicle passed slowly near me with its back doors open, I could see several American soldiers, obviously wounded, lying on stretchers inside. It was late afternoon as we trudged through the valley, past the dreaded Dragon's Teeth. Artillery fire was loud, and as we were walking into a small German community that was already receiving incoming artillery shells, we were told this little community was called Simmerath. Just houses and barns really badly burned, shelled, and bombed. Sergeant Casper led us through some debris-laden yards and told us to dig in. Our several mortar squads proceeded to dig holes, each large enough to accommodate one mortar and several men. We all scrambled around to find lumber, metal, and other debris to cover the top of our holes to protect from incoming shells and the cold of the night. We stuffed cracks and other large openings with small pieces of wood, blankets, and other material, and then we settled in for the night. We soon became familiar to the sounds of the dreaded German 88 artillery, the 1 or 2 second whistles, the fraction of a second of silence, and then the explosion. If a whine of an incoming shell lasted longer and was louder, we knew that it would land close to us. December 14th. Dawn broke, and we expected to begin firing our mortars, but we were restrained. Enemy 88 shells were hitting our town again, and there were rumors of individual German snipers still in Simmerath, even though the town was essentially in American hands. Machine gun fire was very much in evidence in the distance, but we still received no orders to fire our mortars. We kept busy further fortifying our mortar positions against the cold and the German 88s, running errands and performing chores as ordered by our superiors. It was late afternoon when we were shocked to learn that our squad leader, Sergeant Casper, had been shot and killed by an enemy soldier. I was temporarily promoted to acting squad leader. December 15th broke, and we were given permission to begin firing our mortars according to prearranged conditions and in support of our troops who were experiencing a tough time still trying to secure Kesterneck. In the confusion of battle, we did not get reports of progress, but we were given orders to fire and to do other things without knowing what the situation really was up ahead. Not long after we began firing our mortars, the enemy sensed this activity was coming out of Simmerath, and we began receiving incoming artillery fire much closer to our positions. It was that day that a German 88 shell landed at the very end of one of our mortal encampments, killing one of our squad and seriously wounding another. The war and its terrible implications were becoming more evident to us hour by hour. It appeared that the Germans had our mortar positions zeroed in. After surviving another night in our makeshift shelters, we awoke on December 16th. We were existing on K rations. We were getting cold, and we had wet feet due to the damp conditions. As late afternoon approached, we were ordered to knock down our standing mortars, put on light packs, grab rifles and ammunition, and prepare to move up to assist the beleaguered men at the front. I remember being scared as we prepared our rifles for firing and secured ample ammunitions in preparing to move out of Cimmerath in the direction of Kesternick. It was getting dark, and we moved slowly and silently in single file, dispersed so as to minimize the possible effect of enemy fire upon us. We were now being led by a Sergeant Blackford. His countenance was stern as he admonished us to prepare for the worst. Some distance out of Cimmerath, we formed a skirmish line and hunkered down. We tried to find a shell hole or previously occupied foxhole for protection and still have a line of sight to the front. After shivering for several hours, Sergeant Blackford said we were going back to Cimmerath. Returning to the village, we were told to grab blankets and try to bed down in a big old stone-walled building. Luckily, the walls were thick and sturdy because we came under intense artillery fire. In spite of that, our mess sergeant and crew had brought in hot food, and it was a welcome feast for those of us who had had no hot food for hours. But apparently I ate more than my shrunken stomach could accommodate, because I remember getting sick. I was not alone in that regard, and so we jokingly blamed the mess sergeant for treating us to diarrhea. Dawn on December 17th broke, and I was still alive. We were told to board trucks for a trip to the rear and a short period of rest and relaxation. We were taken several miles behind the lines, allowed to bathe, draw some clean clothes, and given food for sustenance. We were also billeted in a private home, occupied by an elderly man and his wife. I distinctly remember this friendly couple offered a buddy and me a glass of wine and some light refreshments before we went to bed. I had been under the impression that we were in Belgium, but not being able to communicate with our hosts because of the language problem, we had no proof. Then the couple proudly showed us a picture of their son in a German uniform. We were not sure if we were in a German household or if their Belgian son was recruited to fight in the German army. Even though we were wary of staying in that house, we both fell into the thick, soft feather bed provided for us, and we had a first good night's rest in several days. Needless to say, we locked the bedroom door, and we kept our rifles at the ready. Though I was to have other harrowing experiences, including being wounded at Remagen, these 5 days really opened my young and innocent eyes to the reality of war. Signed by Cletus Hendrickson.